Welcome back, my dear patrons. It's time for my next walkthrough video. I'm really excited about this one. I love how it turned out, and I can't wait to show you guys the process. So let's get started. The beginning of this video actually shows the black and white underpainting process. And again, this is an optional step. I'm doing this with black acrylic paint. I need to make a blog about this actually, but I used acrylic paints for about 10 years exclusively before I tried oil paints in about 2017. And I naturally, just myself, I naturally work from dark to light. And being a landscape painter, I like to use textures and things like that to describe the land. And so when I started using oil paints, I quickly got a little impatient with the drying time. Obviously, oils take days to dry. And building up darker layers to light layers is really kind of difficult when you start out with a really dark color that you lay down in oil paint and then try and immediately build a highlight on top of it. It doesn't really work out. So I came up with this trick. I kind of tried it out, I kind of made it up myself. And then I realized that a lot of other artists actually do this. They do a really contrasted underpainting like this, where it's a lot of textures and highlight and shadow areas, but really no actual gradation of shadows and things like that. Bob Ross does it a few times, and there's another Disney artist, a painter that I've seen do it a few times. He does landscapes too. I think it was James Coleman, but so basically, you can do this in oil with a black and white underpainting scale if you want. People do underpaintings in burnt sienna and things like that, and do basically a black and white version of your piece. And again, it's optional, but for this piece, it really just helps me see the land and things like that. And I mean, if you kind of look at it in this state, it looks like a believable space. It doesn't look obviously very detailed or colorful or interesting, but you at least know how certain textures are supposed to look. It's kind of just a good step up into the process and takes a lot of the fear away into putting color in. So now that the black acrylic is dried and I've actually sealed it again with the clear matte medium that I use, we're going to move on to oils. And the only medium I'm using here is just thinner. And I'm actually starting out with a pretty thin wash in some places. I'm not letting the paint run down the canvas, but it is pretty transparent. And not all of the paints I'm using are transparent. They just happen to go on the canvas that way. But my main focus here now is to establish where the light's coming from. And in this world today, we're doing a really green forest scene, so I want the highlights to be yellow and lime green. So I'm using like the cadmium yellow, or the Hansa Yellow and lemon yellow, and the cooler greens for like the darker, closer areas. I tend to paint my scenes where the light source is far off in the distance or by the horizon. That's just like my preference. So I'm not working on grass textures here or anything like that. I'm just laying down, different shades of greens and seeing how they look and playing around with it. But if you do notice, I'm using the same angled brush. I think it's about an inch or a half inch angled a shader brush, and I use this for a long time in the video. I like to work from large to small brushes and get as much mileage as I can out of the brush. But here, while I'm working on these trees, I'm trying to keep them really abstract, and again, using that brush in as many ways as I can to put down as many different textured brush strokes as I can for my style, which is more, impressionistic or so, if you want to call it that. The trees don't have individual leaves most of the time. It's just the impression of, bunches of trees and dabbles of light and chunks of shadow and things like that. And it's really easy to achieve when you kind of just don't think too hard about what leaves are sitting where and what branches are where. I'm also using that brush to create the tree trunks, though. When you hold it at a vertical angle, it is really easy to make some pretty quick strokes with the darker colors and make some tree silhouettes. So again, I'm still using this same large brush. I started blocking in that tree to the left a little bit. I started to make it green to make it kind of blend in with the background more, but I decided to make it pop a little bit and turn it brown. That's just mostly raw umber, I think, and maybe some olive green, just to make it still a cool colored tree. Usually I like to put a lot of mushrooms and, little fairy holes and things like that on my trees, but with this one, I want the focal point to really be the tower, so I end up leaving that tree pretty basic. The focal point is the flowers and the highlights and things like that. So now, while I'm working on this tower, I wanted to make it a color that was not too attention-grabbing, like not a white tower or black, really. So I'm making it just kind of a almost very neutral gray-blue, like as stone-colored as I can, but also keeping it dark because it is in a shady forest. Also, I'm concentrating on cool shadows and a little bit warmer or brighter highlights for the tower because it is a cylinder shape, so I want to make sure that there's form there. And as far as the tower top goes, or the roof, I made this tower up. I didn't use a photo reference, so I just put a generic triangle on there and shaded it also accordingly. So there's that cool blue shadow on the left and then the warm tan highlight to the right again. I knew I wanted it a different color than the base of the tower, so I kind of just went with almost like a, just a wood or brown. It could be made of hay. It doesn't really matter as long as it looks like a tower. I'm not really concerned of. So now we're moving on to adding some textures to the trees. And again, I'm still using that same angled brush. I have cleaned it, between, the brown of the tower and things like that. And I'm using less and less thinner as this painting goes on, or if any at all. I could just be using straight paint. Otherwise, your paint would just run down the canvas. You wouldn't be getting anywhere. But I tend to lay on a pretty loaded paintbrush, and it creates some nice big dabs of highlights and things like that. So for the highlighted areas inside this forest right here, I'm actually using like the tip of the angled brush to kind of just add little blurs here and there. And now I actually have switched to a smaller brush. I was kind of playing around with some streaks of light. I didn't immediately like how they looked, so I kind of blended them out a little bit. And that's something that you can add in a later stage when the painting is dry, and it'll be easy to remove. This painting is actually done all wet on wet. As I said, I used a lot of thinner in the beginning, and then as the painting goes on, it's less and less thinner or no thinner. But I did do this painting over about 10 hours, or I'd say it took about a day, and it was broken up into a few hour chunks because I had to go, eat lunch or pick up my children or something like that. But so the layers underneath, the thinner that I did put down in the beginning did dry up and all that. So the painting itself is, it's dry now, and it holds up really well when I do it that way. So now I've added enough highlights to the trees, and I don't want it to be too attention grabbing. So I've stopped that for now, and I wanted to move on to the stairs. And same thing with the color of the stairs. I wanted them to look obviously different than the forest and not green, but I want them to just be very subtle. So I made them that same kind of stony color. And I'm back to that large brush again because it has a nice straight edge, and it's very easy to shape the stairs and add the nice straight highlights and shadows and things like that. And the majority of the color of these stairs in the stone is the Payne's gray with a little bit of white and or the phthalo turquoise or the phthalo green that's right there. And again, I'm not using a photo reference for the stairway. I just kind of make it up as I go, put in some subtle highlights, and I think I go back later and tweak it a little bit. So now I'm adding in a little bit closer up textures, and this is where I use mostly, loaded paintbrush. I'm not slathering it on there, obviously, but I'm just touching it up enough to create textures for bushes and little areas of grass and things like that. And you see here I'm going back to the tower and adding a little bit more contrast under that roof. and that's just a really dark color. I think I'm using Payne's Gray to do that. Okay, so here I am adding the texture of the tower, and I decided to make it like a river rock tower, or like, you know, how they put different stones together, not brick textured. I didn't want to paint like boring vertical and horizontal lines. I really love how stairways and towers or buildings look with like the big stones that are masoned together. So I used the one brush and actually loaded it up with by accident actually, with a lighter color on the short corner, and the rest of the brush had a darker color. And so when I started putting down some abstract little rock shapes, it actually made it look highlighted to begin with. So that was kind of cool. I didn't really have to go in and add any highlights to the rocks. And I kind of toyed with the idea of giving the tower windows, but I really am glad that I decided to make it just a open windowed tower and put the forest view straight into those holes. And I think if I did windows, I would have concentrated too much on either making them like stained glass or, you know, some other color that was, I didn't want it to attract too much attention. I really want the focal point of this painting to be the garden and the flowers. And so as far as the texture as the top of the tower goes, in hindsight, it kind of looks like an ice cream cone when I'm done with this texture. But I was going for shingles, and I'm not doing a very consistent job with the brush strokes. I like how it looks either way. It's still a little impressionistic. It's fine. I'm not doing like a detailed pencil illustration, so I'm okay with how it looks. I still have my warm highlights and the cool shadows, so it's believable as roof texture, and that's fine with me. So now, if you've noticed, I've added to my palette my permanent rose and my dioxazine purple. Those weren't there before because I didn't want them to distract me while I concentrated on my earth colors. But I've added them now, and I'm starting with some very easy to paint flowers. I'm using a really stiff fan brush, and I'm actually doing this color on purpose. I'm using a cool color because this is a very cool scene still. It's really green, and these flowers are very blue and purple. Those flowers are not very attention grabbing. They're very subtle and, again, cool colored. And I'm painting this scene from cool to warm colors. That's, again, just how I naturally work. And I feel like the warm colors like red or hot pink or yellow and orange are really like power colors. And once those are down, it can really change the direction of how the viewer's eye goes through the painting and things like that. And sometimes I use it to my advantage, like with the underwater pieces, but with gardens and things like that, I really like to add those last. And it can really, really change how your gardens look and things like that. So I'm using, again, I use the fan brush for the little tiny carpeted flowers at the bottom. And for the little tower flowers on the bottom right, they're supposed to be foxgloves or something similar. I just kind of dabbed on with a filbert. And now I'm actually using a small angle brush here to put some kind of tall flowers in the background. And I think I actually changed these in the end, but and I used the top corner of the angled brush again to make like the little rose bush that's on the tower. That blue flower right there was immediately too bright, so I like blurred it back out. But yeah, I'm just using different brush strokes. I'm not using very small brushes at all. I think that filbert is maybe a 4. It's not like a fine, sharp paintbrush. I don't want to get really too engrossed into painting single little flower petals. That is not my cup of tea. You can do that if you want. As far as these leaves go on the tower, though, I did take my time and lay them down kind of in a certain pattern. This is supposed to be a morning glory vine, and I love this plant. The leaves it's a really resilient plant, and it loves full sunshine, and the leaves are really big and heart-shaped, and they always face, obviously, towards the sun, and they don't overlap each other. They kind of, they almost have a pattern look to them, so I tried to convey that on the tower. And for the little tuft of, like, moss on the top of the tower here, I'm just using a really small square shader, just to kind of create some abstract little green tufts and highlight them a little bit. And then I go back in with like a light pink. I thought it would be really pretty, but not, again, too attention grabbing. I want it to be just subtle and like a flowering little a vine or moss hanging right there. These flower placements aren't really planned out. I knew that I wanted vines on the tower just because it needs a vine on there. I love vines and I love how they climb up things and they're so gorgeous, especially flowering vines and things like that. So here's where I kind of improvised with the stairs. I saw that the shadows were too dark, and I was going to go in with that brush and highlight or bring up those shadows a little bit and make them lighter, but then I decided last minute to make it that same river rock texture as the tower and, you know, put some actual stones in there, and I really like how it turned out. It brought the darkness of the stairs up without, you know, it still kept some contrast there, so that was good. And so now is the really cool part where I added the highlights into the stairs with, it's, I think, a lot of really light green. So that lime green color right there, yellow and white. And I'm just using some really flat, precise strokes to go over the top of the stairs. And right here, I'm adding like a really cool glow effect to the top upper part of the staircase right there. And it looks like the light is hitting the stairs, and it also helped shape the staircase a little bit and make them more straight. So now I've basically got a lot of my scene in here, and I'm just going in and touching up like the sides of the tower to make sure that they are a little bit more distinguishable from the rest of the forest. Adding like a little bit of highlights to the windows and the bottom of the roof and things like that. I also go in and play a little bit more with the forest and just, it's really not necessary, but it's just kind of having fun with how little shadows and highlights go together. I also, you can't see it very well in this shot right here, but I added a little bit of some pink flowers to the branch that's in the upper right hand corner. It just brought a little bit more color into that corner. Again, you don't have to do that. This is just me loading it with as many flowers as possible, and it's just really having fun and seeing how pretty you can make it. So right now I'm adding in some dark leaves and a little bit of highlights to the flowers that are at the bottom, and I think I like how that looks. It brings your eye down a little bit more. So this was a last minute choice to add a few lanterns. The scene looked pretty good to me. It looked very over the top flowery and things like that. So I decided to see how it looked with these lanterns added in. And it was kind of a risk to do that since this painting is still wet. I was confident enough to, you know, just rub it out if I didn't like it. But I took a chance, and I kind of like how it balances out where your eye's going in the painting. And I ended up leaving them and adding a little bit of sparkle. Sorry about the static in the background, it's my window. But I really like how the little magical touch I added in with the lanterns just kind of finished it off and made it look more like a believable fantasy scene instead of just like a random garden. So that is it. The main takeaway I think I want you guys to take from this is just to really see how much mileage you can get out of one brush when you're doing a painting. And then once you feel like you've done as much as you possibly can, move to the next brush. Actually, before I sit down and paint and mix my colors, I pick my brushes. That's just something I do. I've not really ever planned that from the beginning, but I like to visualize where I'm going to start painting and pick out that brush. It kind of just eliminates confusion when you sit down and have the big jar of paintbrushes in front of you. If I only have a bunch of you know, 5 small brushes or so, then it, again, eliminates confusion and room for error when you know you only have a few small options that you've already chosen for yourself. Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate your support. I really hope you enjoyed the walkthrough. Leave a comment below or message me on Patreon. I cannot wait to make Marcia's painting. I'm so excited. I still actually am not sure what I'm going to paint, but I will see you guys next time. Bye.